The sound that echoed through the second-floor bathroom wasn't what you'd expect from a typical high school confrontation. It wasn't the usual screaming or crying that bullies were used to hearing from their victims. Instead, it was something far more chilling, the sharp intake of breath from four teenagers who had just realized they had cornered the wrong girl. Madison Parker lay sprawled on the cold tile floor, her designer jeans torn at the knee, staring up at the ceiling with wide, disbelieving eyes. Tyler Stevens was doubled over by the sinks, clutching his stomach and gasping for air like a fish out of water. Brooke Williams sat slumped against the bathroom stalls, her perfectly styled blonde hair now a tangled mess, while Jake Morrison was pressed against the wall, his face pale as paper, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Standing in the center of it all was Maya Johnson, the quiet new girl they'd been tormenting for weeks. Her dark skin glistened with a light sheen of sweat, but her breathing was steady, controlled. The same girl who had endured their racist comments in silence, who had cleaned up their accidents without complaint, who had seemed so powerless and afraid, now stood over them with the calm composure of someone who had been holding back the entire time. "I warned you," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a steel that none of them had ever heard before. "I told you to leave me alone." Madison tried to speak, but only a strangled whimper came out. The girl who had ruled Westfield High School through fear and social manipulation was experiencing terror for the first time in her privileged life, and she didn't know how to process it. But how did we get here? How did four of the most popular, confident students at Westfield High end up broken and crying on a bathroom floor, utterly dominated by the girl they thought was an easy target? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks earlier, Maya Johnson stepped out of her family's modest sedan and looked up at the imposing brick facade of Westfield High School. The building stretched across nearly a full city block, its red brick walls and white columns giving it an air of institutional authority that reminded her uncomfortably of some of the military bases where she'd spent her childhood. Students streamed through the main entrance in clusters, their conversations creating a buzz of excitement and anxiety that marked the beginning of another school year. Maya adjusted the straps of her worn backpack and took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew would be another challenging transition. At 17, she had attended 12 different schools across 8 states, following her father's military career from base to base, town to town. Each move had taught her the same harsh lesson. Being the new kid was never easy, but being the new black kid in predominantly white communities came with its own unique set of challenges. Westfield, Ohio was no different from the other small towns she'd lived in. The kind of place where Friday night football games were the biggest social events, where family names carried weight for generations, and where anyone who didn't fit the established mold was viewed with suspicion at best, hostility at worst. Maya had learned to read these environments quickly, to identify the social hierarchies and power structures that would determine how her experience unfolded. Her father, Sergeant Major Robert Johnson, had been deployed overseas for the past 8 months, leaving Maya and her mother to handle this latest relocation on their own. Her mother, Angela, worked double shifts at the local hospital as a nurse, trying to keep their small family afloat financially while dealing with the stress of being a military spouse. It meant Maya was largely on her own to navigate the treacherous waters of teenage social politics. Walking through the main hallway of Westfield High, Maya kept her head down and her expression neutral, a survival strategy she'd perfected over years of being the outsider. The hallway stretched before her like a canyon, lined with lockers painted in the school's colors of blue and gold. Students clustered around their lockers in established groups, their body language and positioning telling the story of Westfield's social ecosystem as clearly as any textbook. Near the main entrance, the athletes dominated the prime real estate. Football players in leather jackets stood surrounded by admirers, their voices carrying over the general din as they recounted summer adventures and made plans for the weekend. The cheerleaders occupied the adjacent territory, their perfectly coordinated outfits and synchronized movements marking them as the social elite. Further down the hall, the various other tribes had established their territories, the drama kids near the auditorium entrance, the academic achievers closer to the library, the artists clustered around bulletin boards displaying student work. Maya found her locker assignment in the senior wing, squeezing between two groups of students who barely acknowledged her presence. Her combination worked on the second try, and she began the familiar ritual of organizing her supplies while observing her new environment. The locker to her right belonged to a thin Asian girl with wire-rimmed glasses who nodded politely, but didn't speak. The one to her left was covered in stickers and photos, clearly belonging to someone more established in the school's social hierarchy. "Excuse me, you're in my friend's spot." Maya turned to find herself face to face with a girl who radiated the kind of confidence that came from never having to question her place in the world. Madison Parker was everything Maya had expected from the moment she walked into Westfield High. Tall, blonde, and beautiful in the effortless way that came from good genetics and expensive maintenance. Her designer jeans probably cost more than Maya's entire back-to-school wardrobe, and her smile had the practiced perfection of someone who had been performing for an audience her entire life. "This is my assigned locker," Maya replied calmly, showing Madison the paper with her locker number and combination. Madison's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her blue eyes. "Oh, you must be the new girl. I'm Madison Parker. My dad's on the school board, so if there's been some kind of mistake with your assignment, I can totally help get it sorted out." The threat was delivered with such sugar-sweet politeness that someone unfamiliar with social warfare might have missed it entirely. But Maya had been navigating these waters for years, and she recognized the opening gambit of what would likely be a sustained campaign of harassment if she didn't establish boundaries immediately. "That's very kind of you," Maya responded her tone equally polite, but with an undertone of steel that Madison wasn't quite sure how to interpret. "But I'm sure the administration has everything handled correctly. I'm Maya Johnson, by the way." Madison's smile flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself with renewed intensity. "Maya Johnson, how exotic. Where are you from originally?" The question was loaded with implications, and Maya felt the familiar weight of being reduced to her otherness, her blackness making her perpetually foreign in the eyes of people like Madison. "My family moves around a lot for my father's work," she answered neutrally, not taking the bait. "Oh, how interesting. Well, I hope you'll find Westfield to be welcoming." Madison's pause before the last word was deliberate, loaded with meaning. "We have such a tight-knit community here. Sometimes it can be hard for outsiders to find their place, especially when they don't really understand our traditions and expectations." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Two other girls had materialized behind Madison during this exchange, clearly her lieutenants in whatever social army she commanded. One was a petite brunette with sharp features and calculating eyes, while the other was a strawberry blonde, who seemed to exist primarily to nod in agreement with whatever Madison said. "This is Brooke Williams and Jessica Martinez," Madison continued, gesturing to her companions. "We've been friends since elementary school. That's the thing about Westfield, relationships here go back generations. Family connections, social bonds, that sort of thing. It creates a very exclusive atmosphere." Maya understood the subtext perfectly. This was Madison's territory, and she was being warned not to overstep boundaries that hadn't even been explicitly defined yet. The smart play would be to acknowledge Madison's dominance, accept a subordinate position in the social hierarchy, and hope for tolerance if not acceptance. Instead, Maya smiled and closed her locker with a decisive click. "I'm sure I'll figure out how things work here. I always do." She walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Madison and her friends standing by the lockers with expressions of surprise and growing irritation. Maya had just committed the cardinal sin of not being intimidated by Westfield High's reigning queen, and everyone within earshot had witnessed the subtle but unmistakable challenge. Maya's first period was advanced placement history with Mrs. Thompson, a stern-looking woman in her 50s who ran her classroom with military precision that reminded Maya of home. The desks were arranged in perfect rows, and students filed in with the subdued energy of people who knew they were being evaluated from the moment they crossed the threshold. Maya chose a seat in the middle of the third row, positioning herself where she could observe without being too conspicuous. She pulled out a notebook and pen, both purchased from the discount section of the local pharmacy, and prepared to take notes. Around her, other students chatted quietly while Mrs. Thompson organized papers at her desk. "Looks like we have a new student joining us this year," Mrs. Thompson announced as the bell rang. "Miss Johnson, would you like to introduce yourself to the class?" Maya stood, feeling the weight of 30 pairs of eyes examining her appearance, her clothes, her bearing. She had learned long ago that these moments of introduction were crucial in establishing how she would be perceived for the rest of her time at any given school. "I'm Maya Johnson," she said simply. "My family just moved here from North Carolina. I'm looking forward to learning about Ohio history and being part of this class." Her introduction was deliberately brief and unrevealing, giving her classmates nothing they could use against her, while demonstrating that she wasn't intimidated by their scrutiny. She sat back down amid a murmur of whispered conversations, already knowing that her every word was being analyzed and dissected by the social intelligence network that operated in every high school. Mrs. Thompson launched into her opening lecture about the Civil War's impact on Ohio, and Maya found herself genuinely engaged with the material. History had always been one of her strongest subjects, partly because her father's military background had given her a unique perspective on conflict and strategy, and partly because she found the patterns of human behavior fascinating to study. "Can anyone tell me why Ohio played such a crucial role in the Underground Railroad?" Mrs. Thompson asked. Maya's hand shot up instinctively. Then she caught herself and glanced around the room. Several other students had raised their hands as well, but she noticed that Madison Parker, who sat 2 rows ahead of her, was watching her with keen interest. "Miss Johnson, since you're new, why don't you take a shot at this one?" Maya stood again, aware that this was another test. Ohio's geographic position made it a natural corridor for escaped slaves traveling north to Canada. The Ohio River formed a natural boundary between slave and free states, and cities like Cincinnati and Cleveland had active abolitionist communities that provided support networks for refugees. Additionally, Ohio's industrial economy created job opportunities for people seeking new lives and freedom. "Excellent answer," Mrs. Thompson said with approval. "You've clearly studied this period before." Maya sat down, noting the mixture of impressed and resentful expressions around her. Academic achievement was always a double-edged sword for new students. It could earn respect from teachers and serious students, but it also marked you as a potential threat to those who were used to being at the top of the intellectual hierarchy. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of introductions, syllabus reviews, and careful social navigation. Maya had a P chemistry with Mr. Rodriguez, where she was paired with Emma Chen, the quiet girl from the locker next to hers. Emma turned out to be surprisingly insightful once she opened up, and Maya sensed the possibility of a genuine friendship developing. "Madison Parker's been watching you all morning," Emma observed quietly as they worked on their first lab assignment. "That's usually not a good sign for new students." "What's her story?" Maya asked, measuring chemicals with precise movements that spoke to more experience than most high school students possessed. "Her family basically runs this town," Emma explained. "Her father's on the school board. Her mother heads the PTA, and they own the largest car dealership in the county. Madison's been the unofficial queen of Westfield High since freshman year. She's not used to being challenged, and she definitely doesn't like it when someone doesn't immediately acknowledge her authority. Maya nodded thoughtfully. What about the others? Tyler Stevens, Jake Morrison? Emma glanced around nervously before continuing. Tyler's the star quarterback, and Jake's his best friend. They're both from old Westfield families, the kind where their grandfathers went to school here, and their kids probably will too. They're used to getting whatever they want, and they don't take kindly to outsiders who don't know their place. And what place would that be? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. Grateful and subordinate, Emma replied bluntly. They expect new students, especially scholarship kids or anyone who doesn't fit their image of what Westfield should be, to be thankful for the opportunity to exist in their space. They particularly don't like students who might outshine them academically or socially. Maya processed this information while completing her lab work with mechanical precision. The social dynamics at Westfield were exactly what she had expected, but understanding them intellectually and dealing with them emotionally were two very different things. She had spent years perfecting the art of flying under the radar, of being unremarkable enough to avoid attention while being competent enough to succeed academically. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the accumulation of years of similar experiences, or maybe it was the knowledge that her father was risking his life overseas while she dealt with privileged teenagers who thought their worst problems were worth genuine drama. Whatever the reason, Maya found herself less willing to simply endure whatever harassment Madison and her crew might have planned. The lunch bell rang like a starting pistol for the afternoon's social warfare. Maya collected her brown bag lunch from her locker and surveyed the cafeteria with the tactical awareness her father had taught her. The room was divided into clearly defined territories, each group maintaining strict boundaries that were invisible but absolute. The athletes dominated the center tables, their voices loud and their gestures expansive as they claimed the prime real estate. Madison and her inner circle held court at a table near the windows, positioned so they could see and be seen by the maximum number of students. The academic achievers clustered near the library entrance, their conversations focused on upcoming tests and college applications. Various other groups filled the remaining spaces according to a complex social algorithm that had taken years to establish. Maya chose an empty table near the edge of the cafeteria, close enough to observe the main action, but far enough away to avoid immediate confrontation. She unpacked her simple lunch, a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water, and tried to project calm indifference while internally mapping escape routes and potential allies. She had been eating in silence for about 10 minutes when Tyler Stevens approached her table. At 6'3" with the broad shoulders and confident swagger of someone who had never been told no, Tyler was exactly what Central Casting would order for the role of high school quarterback. His leather jacket hung perfectly on his frame, and his smile had the practiced charm of someone accustomed to getting his way through a combination of athletic achievement and social status. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, though he was already pulling out a chair before Maya could respond. "Free country," Maya replied neutrally, not looking up from her sandwich. Tyler laughed as if she had said something tremendously witty. "You're funny, I like that. I'm Tyler Stevens, by the way. I think we might have some classes together, Maya Johnson. And yes, we have a P history and English together." Right, you're the new girl. Where'd you transfer from?" Maya recognized the opening of an intelligence-gathering mission. Tyler's casual tone and friendly demeanor were designed to lower her guard and encourage her to reveal information that could later be used against her. It was a technique she had seen deployed countless times in various schools, and she had learned to navigate these conversations carefully. "North Carolina," she answered simply, offering no additional details. Cool. What brought your family to Westfield? Job transfer? Something like that. Tyler's smile tightened slightly at her evasiveness, but he pressed on with determined cheerfulness. Well, you picked a great place to land. Westfield's an awesome town, and the school has a lot to offer. Great academics, championship sports, teams, active social scene. I'm sure you'll love it here once you get settled in. I'm sure I will, Maya agreed, her tone polite but non-committal. Tyler leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a confidence. Listen, I know it can be tough being the new kid, especially somewhere like Westfield, where a lot of us have known each other since elementary school. If you ever need someone to show you around, introduce you to people, help you figure out how things work around here, just let me know. I'd be happy to help. The offer sounded generous on the surface, but Maya recognized it for what it really was, an attempt to establish himself as her guide and protector, positioning himself as the gatekeeper who could determine her social standing at Westfield. It was a power play disguised as kindness, and accepting his help would mean acknowledging his authority over her social destiny. That's very thoughtful of you, Maya replied. But I prefer to figure things out on my own. I always have. Tyler's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the friendly mask slipping for just a moment to reveal something harder underneath. Well, sure, independence is great and all. But Westfield has its own way of doing things, you know. Traditions and expectations that might not be obvious to someone from the outside. It can be easy to accidentally step on toes or misunderstand social cues if you don't have someone to guide you. The warning was clear. Conform to their expectations or face the consequences. Maya met his eyes steadily, letting him see that she understood exactly what he was really saying. I appreciate the concern, she said quietly, but I think I can handle myself. Tyler held her gaze for a long moment, and Maya could see him recalibrating his approach. When he smiled again, it was with less warmth and more calculation. I'm sure you can, he said, standing up from the table. Just remember, we all have to live together in this place for the next 9 months. It's always better when everyone gets along and knows their place in the community. He walked away with the easy confidence of someone who had delivered his message and expected it to be received and understood. Maya watched him rejoin his friends at the center table, noting the way they leaned in to hear his report on their conversation. Madison Parker glanced over at Maya with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and contempt, and Maya knew that she had just failed some kind of test. The rest of lunch passed quietly, but Maya could feel the weight of observation as various students stole glances at her table. Word was spreading through the cafeteria's communication network that the new girl had rebuffed Tyler Stevens' offer of guidance, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Maya finished her lunch methodically, refusing to be hurried by the social pressure building around her. She had been in this position before, in other schools and other towns, and she knew that how she handled the next few days would determine the entire trajectory of her experience at Westfield High. What none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly have guessed from her humble appearance and quiet demeanor, was that Maya Johnson was far from defenseless. Her father's military career had taken their family to some dangerous places, and Sergeant Major Johnson had made sure his daughter could protect herself in any situation. Years of martial arts training, self-defense instruction, and tactical awareness education had turned Maya into something that looked like an easy target, but was actually one of the most dangerous people in the building. More importantly, Maya had learned to read people and situations with the precision of someone whose survival had often depended on understanding hidden motivations and unspoken threats. She could see exactly what Madison Parker and her crew were planning, could predict their moves before they made them, and could prepare countermeasures that would leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about power and control. But for now, she would wait. She would observe and gather intelligence, letting them believe they held all the advantages while she quietly cataloged their weaknesses and planned her response. Because Maya Johnson had learned something in her travels that these privileged teenagers had never had to discover. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks like they don't belong there. The afternoon classes passed in a haze of introductions and syllabus reviews, but Maya's attention was divided between the academic material and the social dynamics playing out around her. In every class, she could feel the weight of evaluation. From her new classmates, the careful assessment of whether she represented a threat or an opportunity. By the time the final bell rang, Maya had a clear understanding of Westfield High's ecosystem and her precarious position within it. She had been marked as an outsider who refused to accept her designated place in the hierarchy, which made her a problem that needed to be solved. Based on her experience at other schools, she estimated she had perhaps a week before Madison Parker and her allies escalated from subtle intimidation to more direct confrontation. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that Maya Johnson had been preparing for this confrontation her entire life. And when it finally came, they would discover that they had chosen the wrong target for their games of power and domination. As Maya walked toward the school exit, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her expression calm, she looked like just another new student trying to navigate the challenges of fitting in at a new school. But beneath that unremarkable exterior was someone who had survived military bases around the world, who had learned to fight from instructors who trained Special Forces soldiers, and who carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had never met a challenge she couldn't overcome. Tomorrow would bring new tests and new confrontations, but Maya was ready. She had been ready her entire life. The next morning arrived with the crisp bite of early autumn air, and Maya found herself appreciating the familiar ritual of preparing for another day of social warfare. Her apartment was sparse but functional, the kind of temporary housing that military families learned to call home wherever they landed. She dressed carefully in jeans and a simple sweater, nothing that would draw attention, but nothing that screamed poverty either. The balance was delicate and practiced. Her mother had already left for her early shift at the hospital, leaving behind a note wishing Maya luck and reminding her to call if she needed anything. Angela Johnson worried constantly about her daughter's ability to adapt to new environments, not knowing that Maya had developed skills far beyond those of typical teenagers for handling hostile situations. Walking through Westfield's tree-lined streets toward school, Maya reviewed her tactical assessment from the previous day. Madison Parker operated through a combination of social manipulation and economic intimidation, using her family status as leverage to maintain control. Tyler Stevens relied on physical presence and athletic achievement to project dominance, while his friend Jake Morrison seemed to prefer more direct intimidation tactics. Together, they formed a power structure that had likely gone unchallenged for years. The morning hallway scene unfolded with predictable precision. Students clustered around their established territories, conversations flowing in the comfortable rhythms of long-established relationships. Maya moved through this landscape like a ghost, present but not truly seen, cataloging information while maintaining her facade of nervous vulnerability. Her first encounter came during second period, when she discovered her assigned seat in a P English had been occupied by Jessica Martinez, one of Madison's lieutenants. The girl sat with casual defiance, her books spread across the desk in a clear statement of territorial control. "Excuse me," Maya said quietly, "I think you're in my seat." Jessica looked up with theatrical surprise, her expression a masterpiece of feigned confusion. "Oh, are you sure? I've been sitting here since the beginning of the semester. Maybe you read your schedule wrong?" The classroom buzzed with the low energy of students sensing potential conflict. Maya was aware of eyes turning in their direction, conversations pausing as her classmates waited to see how she would handle this obvious provocation. Mrs. Patterson, the English teacher, was still organizing materials at her desk, either unaware of the developing situation or choosing to ignore it. Maya pulled out her class schedule and showed it to Jessica with calm persistence. Seat 14, third row. That's this desk. Jessica examined the paper with exaggerated care, then shrugged with practiced indifference. Looks like there might be some kind of mix-up. These things happen with new students sometimes. Why don't you just take that empty seat in the back? I'm sure it'll work out fine. The empty seat she indicated was directly behind Jake Morrison, who turned to grin at Maya with predatory anticipation. The setup was obvious. Force her to accept a subordinate position while placing her within easy reach of harassment from one of Madison's enforcers. It was a simple but effective tactic that had probably worked on countless other new students over the years. Maya considered her options with the rapid calculation her father had taught her. She could escalate the confrontation, demanding that Mrs. Patterson intervene and enforce the seating chart. This would establish her willingness to fight for her rights, but would also mark her as a troublemaker in the teacher's eyes. Alternatively, she could accept the offered seat and avoid immediate conflict, but this would signal weakness and invite further aggression. Instead, Maya chose a third option. She smiled at Jessica with apparent gratitude and moved to the suggested seat, acting as though she was genuinely thankful for the accommodation. But as she passed Jessica's desk, she stumbled slightly, catching herself against the desktop and accidentally knocking Jessica's expensive coffee tumbler onto the floor. The tumbler, a designer piece that probably cost more than Maya's entire outfit, hit the tile with a satisfying crack. Coffee spread across the floor in a dark puddle, and Jessica's carefully organized notes absorbed the liquid with devastating efficiency. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," Maya exclaimed, her voice pitched perfectly between mortification and helpfulness. "I'm such a klutz. Here, let me help clean this up." She immediately dropped to her knees and began gathering Jessica's soggy papers, her movements quick and efficient. To any observer, she appeared to be a genuinely remorseful new student trying to make amends for an embarrassing accident. But Jessica could see the calculating intelligence in Maya's eyes as she handed back the ruined notes, and she understood that this had been no accident at all. "It's fine," Jessica said through gritted teeth, watching a semester's worth of carefully maintained notes disintegrate in her hands. "Really, don't worry about it." Maya's stumble had been perfectly executed, timed to appear accidental while achieving maximum impact. More importantly, it had been witnessed by the entire class, establishing her as someone who might appear clumsy but could cause significant damage through seemingly innocent actions. The message was subtle but clear, underestimating Maya Johnson could be expensive. Mrs. Patterson finally noticed the commotion and hurried over with paper towels, clucking sympathetically about accidents and offering to let Jessica print new copies of any assignments. Through it all, Maya maintained her expression of mortified helpfulness, but she caught the speculative look that Jake Morrison gave her as she settled into her new seat behind him. The rest of English class passed quietly, but Maya could feel the shift in atmospheric pressure around her. Word of the coffee incident would spread through Westfield's social network within hours, analyzed and interpreted by students who understood that seemingly innocent events often carried deeper meanings. She had drawn first blood in a conflict that was still largely invisible to outside observers. Lunch period brought a new level of sophisticated harassment. Maya approached the cafeteria line only to discover that it had mysteriously slowed to a crawl just as she joined it. Students ahead of her took unusually long to make their selections, engaging the lunch staff in extended conversations about ingredients and preparation methods. By the time Maya reached the serving counter, the most popular items had been depleted, leaving her with limited and unappealing options. She accepted a sad-looking sandwich and a small bag of chips with philosophical calm, recognizing the orchestrated nature of her inconvenience, but refusing to show frustration. As she turned to find seating, she discovered that every table in the cafeteria appeared to be full. Students who had been sitting alone suddenly had backpacks or books spread across extra chairs, while groups that normally welcome new members claimed to be saving seats for absent friends. Maya stood in the center of the cafeteria for a long moment, her tray balanced in her hands as conversations continued around her with studied normalcy. The isolation was complete and expertly executed, designed to demonstrate her powerlessness within Westfield's social ecosystem. Every student in the room could see that she had been marked for exclusion, and most would interpret this as confirmation that challenging Madison Parker's authority carried serious consequences. Finally, Emma Chun waved from a table near the far wall, gesturing for Maya to join her and two other students who appeared to be part of Westfield's academic underground. Maya navigated between tables with measured dignity, refusing to hurry despite the weight of observation from every direction. "Rough morning?" Emma asked quietly as Maya sat down, noting the tension in her posture. "Nothing I can't handle," Maya replied, unwrapping her sandwich with deliberate care. "Just getting a feel for how things work around here." Emma's companions were David Park, a senior who edited the school newspaper, and Lisa Rodriguez, a junior who served as president of the debate team. Both were clearly intelligent and observant, the kind of students who understood Westfield's power dynamics without being part of the dominant social structure. "Madison's really going all out for you," David observed, keeping his voice low. "Usually, new students get a grace period of at least a week before the systematic harassment begins. You must have made quite an impression." "What kind of impression?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Lisa leaned forward conspiratorially. "The kind that suggests you're not going to play by their rules. Madison doesn't like students who think for themselves, especially ones who might challenge her authority or outshine her academically. She's particularly sensitive about students who don't fit her idea of what Westfield should look like," Emma added carefully, glancing around to make sure their conversation wasn't being overheard. "The diversity statistics at this school are carefully managed to look good on paper, while maintaining the social hierarchy that families like the Parkers prefer." Maya processed this information while mechanically eating her sandwich. The dynamics at Westfield were even more systematically oppressive than she had initially realized, with racial and economic prejudices carefully disguised as social preferences and academic standards. It was a sophisticated form of institutionalized discrimination that would be difficult to challenge through official channels. "What happened to the last student who stood up to Madison?" Maya asked. David and Lisa exchanged a meaningful look before David answered. "Transferred mid-semester. There were rumors about planted evidence in her locker, anonymous complaints about academic dishonesty, constant harassment that escalated until her family felt they had no choice but to leave. The school administration never found any proof of wrongdoing by Madison or her friends," Lisa added bitterly. "Apparently, it was all just an unfortunate series of coincidences and understandings." Maya nodded thoughtfully, filing this information away for future reference. Madison Parker was clearly more dangerous than a typical high school bully, with access to resources and connections that allowed her to destroy opponents through systematic campaigns rather than direct confrontation. Any response would need to be carefully planned and precisely executed to avoid the kind of retaliation that had driven previous challengers from Westfield. The afternoon brought a new form of psychological warfare during PE class. Coach Martinez divided the students into teams for a volleyball unit, and Maya found herself assigned to a group that included several of Madison's allies. The assignments appeared random to casual observation, but Maya recognized the careful orchestration that had placed her in a position where she would be isolated and vulnerable to accidental injuries during gameplay. The first few volleys proceeded normally, with Maya demonstrating competent but unremarkable athletic ability. She had learned to moderate her physical capabilities in school settings, knowing that standing out too much in any area could draw unwanted attention. Her father's training had given her reflexes and coordination far beyond those of typical teenagers, but revealing these abilities would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. The deliberate targeting began during the third game when Brooke Williams spiked a ball directly at Maya's face with much more force than necessary. Maya deflected it easily, making the save look lucky rather than skillful, but she could see the calculation in Brooke's eyes as she prepared for the next opportunity. The escalation continued throughout the class period. Balls were aimed at Maya's head and torso with increasing frequency and force, while her teammates positioned themselves to minimize her ability to participate effectively in the game. When she did make successful plays, they were ignored or downplayed, while her failures were highlighted and criticized. Maya endured this treatment with apparent resignation, allowing herself to appear increasingly frustrated and overwhelmed as the harassment intensified. But she was actually using the time to assess the physical capabilities and psychological profiles of Madison's enforcers, gathering intelligence that would prove valuable when the inevitable confrontation finally occurred. The pattern of systematic harassment continued throughout the week, each day bringing new and more creative forms of psychological pressure. Her textbooks disappeared from her locker, only to reappear damaged or defaced. Her homework assignments were mysteriously deleted from shared computer drives. She was excluded from group projects and study sessions, then criticized for not collaborating effectively with her classmates. Through it all, Maya maintained her facade of growing distress while internally cataloging every slight and every perpetrator. She was building a comprehensive map of Madison's organization, identifying key players and their specific roles in the campaign against her. More importantly, she was allowing them to believe that their tactics were working, that she was becoming increasingly isolated and demoralized. The psychological pressure was real and significant, designed to break down her resistance and force her to either submit to Madison's authority or leave Westfield entirely. But Maya had endured far worse treatment in genuinely dangerous situations, and she understood that the current harassment campaign was actually a sign of Madison's weakness rather than her strength. If Madison truly controlled Westfield as completely as she claimed, she wouldn't need to work so hard to eliminate a single new student. By Friday afternoon, Maya had gathered enough intelligence to begin planning her counterattack. She understood. Madison's methods had identified her key allies and their individual vulnerabilities, and had assessed the school's administrative structure and security systems. Most importantly, she had allowed Madison to become overconfident, believing that her victory was inevitable and that Maya posed no real threat to her continued dominance. The confrontation that everyone expected was approaching rapidly, but Maya was confident that when it finally arrived, Madison Parker would discover that she had severely underestimated her opponent. Friday afternoon brought with it the kind of electric tension that preceded major social earthquakes at Westfield High. Maya could feel it in the way conversations stopped when she passed, in the speculative glances from students who sensed that something significant was building but couldn't quite identify what it was. The systematic harassment campaign had reached a crescendo throughout the week, and everyone understood that some kind of resolution was imminent. Maya's last class of the day was advanced chemistry, where she had been paired with Emma Chun for lab work throughout the semester. Emma had proven to be both academically capable and surprisingly perceptive about Westfield's social dynamics, making her one of the few students who seemed to genuinely care about Maya's well-being rather than viewing her as entertainment or a cautionary tale. "You seem different today," Emma observed quietly as they prepared their equipment for a complex titration experiment. "Calmer, somehow. Most people in your situation would be showing more stress by now." Maya measured chemicals with steady hands, her movements precise and controlled despite the pressure she had been under all week. "Stress doesn't help anything," she replied evenly. "Better to focus on what you can control and prepare for what you can't." Emma studied her lab partner's face, noting the lack of anxiety that would be expected from someone enduring the kind of systematic harassment that Maya had faced. "You know they're planning something for this weekend, right? Madison's been dropping hints about teaching you a lesson that will help you understand your place at Westfield." "I figured as much," Maya said, adding a precise amount of solution to their mixture and recording the measurement in her lab notebook. "What kind of lesson did you hear about?" Emma glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Something about the bathroom on the second floor, near the old science wing. It's isolated enough that teachers rarely check it, and there are no security cameras in that area. Madison and her crew have used it before for private conversations with students who needed attitude adjustments." Maya nodded thoughtfully, filing this information away with the tactical assessment she had been building throughout the week. The second-floor bathroom would indeed provide privacy for whatever confrontation Madison was planning, but isolation worked both ways. If Maya was going to reveal her true capabilities, she would need a location where there would be no witnesses to complicate her story afterward. "Thanks for the warning," Maya said simply. "I appreciate you looking out for me." Emma looked like she wanted to say more, perhaps offer some kind of escape plan, or suggest that Maya report the threats to school administration. But she had been at Westfield long enough to understand that official channels were ineffective against students with the kind of family connections that Madison possessed. Instead, she squeezed Maya's shoulder in a gesture of support and returned to their experiment. The final bell rang with the promise of weekend freedom for most students, but Maya knew that her real challenges were just beginning. As she packed her backpack and prepared to leave campus, she was hyper-aware of the surveillance network tracking her movements. Madison's allies were positioned throughout the hallways, observing her route and reporting back to their leader like soldiers conducting reconnaissance. Maya took her time organizing her locker, giving the impression of someone reluctant to leave the relative safety of the main building. In reality, she was using the extra time to observe the patterns of student departure and identify which areas of the school would be empty enough for a private confrontation. When she finally began walking toward the exit, she moved with the careful steps of someone who knew they were being followed. The invitation came during the following Monday morning, delivered with Madison's characteristic blend of sugar-sweet politeness and underlying menace. Maya was retrieving books from her locker when Madison appeared beside her with her usual entourage, their positioning casual but strategically arranged to prevent easy escape. "Maya, sweetie," Madison began, her voice carrying the kind of false warmth that made Maya's skin crawl. "I've been thinking about our conversation from last week, and I realized I may have come across as unwelcoming. That's not the kind of person I want to be, and it's certainly not the image Westfield should project to new students." Maya turned to face Madison directly, noting the calculated performance for the benefit of nearby students who might overhear their conversation. Madison was establishing a public record of attempted friendship, creating plausible deniability for whatever was planned to follow. "That's very thoughtful of you," Maya replied neutrally, neither accepting nor rejecting the overture. Madison's smile brightened as if Maya's response had been enthusiastically positive. "I was thinking we could have a private chat sometime today, just the two of us, where we could clear the air and maybe find some common ground. You know, girl to girl, without all the social pressure and expectations that come with having an audience." The offer was phrased as a friendly gesture, but Maya could see the steel beneath Madison's polished exterior. This was the invitation to the confrontation that everyone had been expecting, delivered with enough public witness to make it seem like Maya's choice rather than an ultimatum. "When and where?" Maya asked, keeping her voice steady and neutral. "How about during lunch? There's a quiet bathroom on the second floor where we can talk without being interrupted. Nothing dramatic, just a chance for us to understand each other." "Better." Maya pretended to consider the offer, allowing a moment of apparent uncertainty to cross her features. "I suppose that would be okay. Thank you for wanting to work things out. Madison's smile became more genuine as she interpreted Maya's response as submission to her authority. Wonderful. I'm so glad we're going to be able to put this misunderstanding behind us. I think you'll find that Westfield can be a very welcoming place once you understand how things work here. The conversation ended with Madison and her friends walking away in a cloud of expensive perfume and satisfied confidence. Maya returned to organizing her locker, but she was already running through tactical scenarios and preparation steps for the upcoming confrontation. Everything had to appear spontaneous and defensive while actually being carefully controlled and strategically advantageous. The morning classes passed with agonizing slowness, each period bringing Maya closer to the confrontation that would determine her status at Westfield for the remainder of her time there. She maintained her facade of nervous anticipation while internally reviewing the combat techniques her father had taught her and the psychological strategies she had learned through years of surviving hostile environments. During her free period, before lunch, Maya made a series of seemingly innocent preparations. She visited the school nurse's office with complaints of mild stomach discomfort, establishing a medical record that might explain any later injuries. She stopped by the main office to ask questions about transfer procedures, creating a paper trail that would support claims of feeling unwelcome at Westfield. Most importantly, she conducted a final reconnaissance of the second-floor bathroom, memorizing the layout and identifying potential advantages and disadvantages. The bathroom was exactly as Emma had described, isolated, poorly monitored, and arranged in a way that would provide privacy for whatever Madison had planned. It was also, Maya noted with professional interest, a tactically advantageous space for someone with her training and capabilities. The tile floors would provide good footing for rapid movement. The sink area offered potential weapons and barriers, and the limited entrances would prevent escape, but also limit the number of opponents who could engage her simultaneously. As lunch period began, Maya made her way toward the second floor with measured steps that projected reluctant compliance rather than tactical preparation. She had timed her arrival to ensure that Madison and her allies would already be in position, eliminating any appearance that she had initiated the confrontation or chosen the battlefield. The hallway outside the bathroom was empty except for Tyler Stevens, who leaned against the wall with the casual posture of someone keeping watch. He nodded at Maya with mock friendliness as she approached, his expression suggesting that he was looking forward to whatever entertainment Madison had planned. "She's waiting inside," Tyler said unnecessarily, gesturing toward the bathroom door. "Don't keep her waiting too long. Madison doesn't like to be kept waiting." Maya pushed open the bathroom door and stepped inside, immediately assessing the tactical situation with the rapid calculation her father had drilled into her. Madison stood near the sinks with Brooke Williams and Jake Morrison flanking her in positions that blocked the most obvious escape routes. Their arrangement was practiced and professional, suggesting that they had used this location for similar confrontations before. "Maya," Madison said warmly, as if greeting an old friend, "I'm so glad you decided to accept my invitation. I think this conversation is going to be very productive for both of us." Maya let the door close behind her with a soft click, noting the way the sound seemed to echo in the tiled space. The acoustics would carry any conversation clearly, but they were far enough from the main hallways that screams or other sounds of distress would be unlikely to attract attention. "What did you want to talk about?" Maya asked, positioning herself near the center of the room where she would have maximum mobility if the situation escalated to physical confrontation. Madison's smile took on a sharper edge as she stepped closer, her voice losing some of its artificial warmth. "I think you know exactly what we need to discuss. You've been at Westfield for over a week now, and frankly, you don't seem to be adapting very well to our community standards." "Community standards?" Maya repeated, genuinely curious about how Madison would frame her complaints. Respect for established social structures, Brooke interjected from her position near the door, understanding that some students have earned their positions through years of dedication to this school and its traditions. Jake nodded in agreement from his spot near the window. New students are expected to show appropriate gratitude for the opportunity to attend Westfield and to recognize that they need to prove themselves before claiming equal status with established members of the community. Maya listened to their justifications with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying tribal customs. The language was carefully chosen to avoid explicit mentions of race or economic class, but the underlying message was clear. She was expected to accept a subordinate position based on her outsider status and to demonstrate submission to Madison's authority. "I see," Maya said calmly. "And what would appropriate behavior look like, in your opinion?" Madison stepped even closer, her voice dropping to a more intimate and threatening level. "Humility, for starters. Recognition that you have a lot to learn about fitting in here. Maybe some public acknowledgement that you've made mistakes in how you've approached social situations at Westfield." The demand for public humiliation was exactly what Maya had expected, and she could see the anticipation in Madison's eyes as she waited for a response. This was the moment when most students would either submit completely or attempt futile resistance that would justify escalating to physical intimidation. Instead, Maya surprised them all by laughing quietly, a sound that held no humor but carried undertones of something that made all three of her opponents suddenly uncertain. "You know what's funny?" Maya said, her voice carrying a new quality that none of them had heard before. "You all think you understand power and control, but you've never actually faced a real threat in your lives. You've been playing games with each other for so long that you've forgotten what genuine danger looks like." Madison's confident expression faltered slightly as she processed Maya's unexpected response. "What are you talking about?" Maya's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, her stance becoming more balanced and her hands moving to positions that would allow rapid response to physical threats. The change was subtle but unmistakable to anyone trained to recognize combat readiness. "I'm talking about the difference between bullying and actual conflict," Maya said quietly. "You've spent years intimidating students who had no real options for resistance, but you've never encountered someone who could actually fight back." Jake took a step forward, his face darkening with anger at Maya's apparent defiance. "You think you're tough, scholarship girl? You think your attitude is going to protect you when things get serious?" Maya turned to look at him directly, and something in her eyes made him pause mid-step. "I think you're about to find out exactly how serious things can get." The temperature in the bathroom seemed to drop several degrees as all three of Madison's group realized that the dynamic they had expected was not developing according to plan. Maya was supposed to be frightened and pleading, not calm and confident. She was supposed to be looking for escape routes, not positioning herself for confrontation. Madison rallied her composure with visible effort, falling back on the social intimidation tactics that had served her so well in previous encounters. "Listen to me very carefully, Maya. You have exactly one chance to apologize for your attitude and commit to making changes in how you approach your place at Westfield. If you can't do that, then we're going to have to help you understand why cooperation is in your best interest." Maya considered the ultimatum with thoughtful silence, letting the tension build in the small space until the anticipation became almost unbearable. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and utterly without fear. "No," she said simply. "I don't think I will." The single word hung in the air like a challenge, and Maya could see the moment when Madison realized that her carefully planned intimidation session was about to become something entirely different from what she had expected. The moment of escalation came with the swift inevitability of the storm that had been building on the horizon for days. Madison's face flushed with anger and disbelief as Maya's simple refusal echoed through the bathroom. shattering the carefully constructed dynamic that had always governed these confrontations at Westfield High. "Excuse me?" Madison said, her voice rising in pitch despite her attempts to maintain control. "I don't think you understand the situation you're in, Maya. This isn't a negotiation. This is me giving you one last chance to avoid serious consequences for your attitude." Maya remained perfectly still, her breathing steady and her gaze level as she met Madison's increasingly frantic stare. "I understand the situation perfectly. 4 students cornered another student in an isolated bathroom to deliver threats and demand submission. What I don't understand is why you think that's going to work on me." Jake Morrison stepped forward. Aggressively, his hands clenched into fists and his face twisted with the kind of rage that came from having his authority questioned by someone he considered beneath his notice. Maybe because little scholarship girls who don't know their place need to be taught lessons they won't forget. He moved with the confident swagger of someone who had never faced real resistance, telegraphing his intentions clearly enough that Maya could have avoided his clumsy grab attempt while blindfolded. Instead, she chose to let him make contact, allowing his hands to seize her shoulders before she responded with the kind of precision that came from years of intensive training. Maya's response was economical and devastating. She trapped Jake's left wrist with her right hand while her left elbow drove upward into his solar plexus with surgical accuracy. The impact drove all the air from his lungs in a harsh gasp, and as he doubled over in pain, Maya's knee connected with his face in a precisely controlled strike that sent him sprawling across the tile floor. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds, executed with such fluid grace that it appeared almost choreographed. Jake lay motionless near the bathroom stalls, blood trickling from his nose and his eyes unfocused with shock and pain. The sound of his body hitting the floor echoed through the small space like a gunshot. Madison and Brooke stared in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The quiet new girl, the scholarship student they had been systematically humiliating for over a week, had just dismantled Jake Morrison with the casual efficiency of a professional fighter. "How?" Brooke whispered, her voice barely audible, above the sound of Jake's labored breathing. Maya straightened her sweater with calm deliberation, her movements unhurried and controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. 12 different military bases across 8 countries, she said conversationally. "My father made sure I could protect myself wherever we were stationed. Apparently, that training transfers well to dealing with small-town bullies." Madison took a step backward, her confidence crumbling as she reassessed everything she thought. She knew about Maya Johnson. This isn't. Assault is a serious crime, Maya. Jake could press charges. Maya tilted her head thoughtfully, as if considering the suggestion with genuine interest. He could try. Of course, he would have to explain what the 4 of you were doing in this isolated bathroom with me, and why he felt the need to put his hands on me in the first place. Given that Tyler Stevens is standing watch outside to make sure we weren't interrupted, I think the evidence would suggest a very different story than the one you're imagining. The implications of Maya's words settled over Madison like a suffocating blanket. She had orchestrated this confrontation so carefully, ensuring privacy and deniability, but those same precautions now worked against her. There were no witnesses to support her version of events, and the physical evidence clearly showed Jake as the aggressor who had been neutralized by someone defending herself. Brooke knelt beside Jake, trying to help him sit up as he struggled to focus his eyes and regulate his breathing. "We need to get him to the nurse," she said urgently. "I think he might have a concussion." "He'll be fine," Maya said with clinical detachment. "I controlled the force precisely to avoid permanent damage. He'll have a headache and some bruised pride, but nothing that won't heal completely within a few days." The casual way Maya discussed the biomechanics of her attack sent a chill through both girls as they realized they were dealing with someone who understood violence in ways they had never imagined. This wasn't the result of lucky desperation or beginner's accident. It was the calculated application of highly trained skills by someone who knew exactly how much force to use to achieve specific results. Madison struggled to regain her composure, falling back on the social authority that had always been her primary weapon. "This doesn't change anything, Maya. You might have caught us off guard this time, but you're still alone at Westfield. You still don't belong here, and you still need to learn your place in our community." Maya turned to face Madison directly, and something in her expression made the other girl take another involuntary step backward. "Actually, Madison, I think this changes everything. You see, you've been operating under some serious misconceptions about who has power in this situation." She began walking slowly toward Madison, her movements predatory and controlled. "You thought you controlled this school because you've never encountered real opposition. You thought your family's money and connections made you untouchable because you've never faced someone who didn't need your approval or protection." Madison bumped into the sink behind her, trapped between Maya's advancing figure and the cold porcelain. "Stay back," she said, her voice cracking with fear for the first time in her privileged life. "Don't touch me." Maya stopped just close, enough to invade Madison's personal space without making physical contact, her presence radiating the kind of controlled menace that made every survival instinct scream warnings. "I'm not going to touch you, Madison. I don't need to. You see, while you were playing your little games this week, I was gathering intelligence." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a tablet, swiping to reveal a series of photographs and documents that made Madison's face go pale. "Did you know that your father's car dealership has been laundering money for a regional drug distribution network? Or that your mother's PTA fundraising accounts show irregular transfers that suggest embezzlement of charitable donations?" Madison stared at the evidence in shock, her mouth opening and closing without sound as she tried to process how Maya could have obtained such detailed information about her family's private affairs. That's impossible. Those records are protected." Maya smiled with genuine amusement, the expression transforming her face from pretty to genuinely dangerous. "Protected by the kind of security that stops average computer users, maybe. But I'm not average at anything, Madison. While you were trying to make my life miserable, I was learning everything there is to know about yours." She swiped to another screen showing financial records and communication logs that documented systematic corruption throughout Westfield's administration. "Principal Anderson has been taking bribes to adjust grades for wealthy students. Coach Martinez has been selling steroids to athletes. Even your precious Tyler Stevens has been using his father's construction company to distribute drugs at school." Events. Brooke looked up from Jake's still-dazed form with terror in her eyes. "How could you possibly know all of this?" Maya's smile widened as she revealed the scope of her capabilities. "Because while you were all focusing on social media and popularity contests, I was learning real skills. Computer security, digital forensics, surveillance techniques. My father's military career gave me access to training programs that most adults never see, and I've been putting those skills to good use since I arrived at Westfield." She showed them security camera footage that had somehow captured private conversations in supposedly secure locations, financial records that revealed the true source of several families' wealth, and communication logs that documented years of corruption and criminal activity throughout their supposedly pristine community. "The beautiful thing about small-town corruption," Maya continued conversationally, "is that it's usually so insular and arrogant that nobody bothers with serious operational security. You've all been operating like you're untouchable, leaving digital fingerprints everywhere, and never imagining that someone might have the skills to follow the trail." Madison's breathing became rapid and shallow as the full implications of Maya's revelation sank in. "What do you want?" she whispered. "Money? We can pay you whatever you need to keep quiet about this." Maya laughed again, the sound holding. Genuine humor this time. You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about money or even revenge. Though I admit there's a certain satisfaction in watching you realize how powerless you actually are. She put the tablet away and stepped back, giving Madison room to breathe while maintaining her psychological dominance. This is about justice, Madison. About making sure that people who abuse their power face consequences for their actions. Jake had managed to sit up against the bathroom wall, his vision clearing enough to follow the conversation, even though his face was already beginning to swell. "You can't prove any of this," he mumbled through his damaged nose. "Digital evidence can be faked." Maya turned to look at him with the patient expression of a teacher correcting a slow student. "You're right that digital evidence can be questioned. In court. That's why I also have physical documentation, recorded confessions, and testimony from witnesses who are willing to cooperate in exchange for immunity from prosecution." She enumerated her evidence with the methodical precision of someone who had been building a comprehensive case rather than simply gathering gossip. "Bank deposit records that I photographed directly from your father's office, Madison. Audio recordings of Tyler bragging about his drug distribution network to his college friends. Video footage of Coach Martinez meeting with his steroid supplier. In the school parking lot." The silence in the bathroom stretched taut as the full weight of Maya's revelations settled over her former tormentors. Madison stood frozen against the sink, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, terror, and dawning comprehension. Brooke had gone completely still beside Jake, who was struggling to process the implications of what he had just heard. Through the haze of his injuries, Maya reached into her backpack again and withdrew a small recording device, placing it on the counter between the sinks with deliberate ceremony. "This conversation has been recorded, by the way, along with Jake's assault and everything that led up to it. I've been documenting the systematic harassment campaign you've been running against me since my first day at Westfield." Madison's voice came out as a strangled whisper. "You're bluffing. You can't have all of this evidence. It's impossible." Maya's expression remained serene as she activated the device, playing back clear audio of their conversation from just minutes earlier. Madison's own voice filled the bathroom, demanding submission and threatening consequences with crystal clarity. The recording continued, capturing Jake's attack and Maya's measured response, providing undeniable documentation of who had initiated violence and who had responded in self-defense. 17 years of moving from place to place teaches you to be prepared for anything, Maya said, stopping the playback and returning the device to her backpack. "My father always said that information is the most powerful weapon you can carry, and that documentation can be the difference between justice and injustice." Brooke found her voice, though it shook with barely controlled panic. "What are you going to do with all of this? What do you want from us?" Maya considered the question with the thoughtful deliberation of someone who had been planning for this moment since her arrival at Westfield. "What I want is very simple. I want the harassment to stop. I want to be able to attend classes and participate in school activities without being subjected to racist comments, systematic exclusion, and threats of violence." She paused, letting the reasonable nature of her demands sink in before continuing. "More importantly, I want the culture of corruption and abuse at this school to change. Students like you have been using your family connections to escape consequences for your actions for too long, and that ends now." Madison rallied some of her former defiance, though it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "You think you can just waltz in here and destroy everything we've built? Westfield has traditions that go back generations. Our families have invested too much in this community to let some outsider tear it down." Maya's smile returned, colder and more predatory than before. "Your traditions include systematic discrimination, academic fraud, and drug distribution. Your family investments have been built on money laundering and embezzlement. I'm not tearing down a community, Madison. I'm exposing a criminal enterprise that's been hiding behind the facade of suburban respectability. She began walking slowly around the bathroom, her movement forcing the other three to constantly adjust their positions to keep her in sight. The psychological effect was devastating, transforming the space from their chosen battlefield into Maya's domain. The beautiful thing about corruption, Maya continued, is that it creates its own vulnerabilities. When people think they're above the law, they get careless. They leave evidence everywhere because they assume no one will ever have the courage or capability to investigate them. Jake struggled to his feet, using the wall for support as he faced Maya with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. Even if you have evidence, you're still just one person against entire families. We have lawyers, connections, influence. You think anyone's going to believe a military brat over established community numbers? Maya's laugh was genuinely amused this time. Oh, Jake, you really haven't been paying attention, have you? I'm not just one person. I'm the tip of a very large and very motivated iceberg. She pulled out her phone and showed them a series of text messages and email chains that revealed the scope of her support network. Did you think I was working alone? My father's military contacts include people in federal law enforcement, financial crimes investigation, and judicial oversight. They've been very interested in the patterns of corruption I've documented here. The color drained from Madison's face as she read message after message from federal agents, prosecutors, and military investigators who had been following Maya's reports with keen interest. What she had assumed was a teenage girl acting alone turned out to be a sophisticated intelligence operation with backing from the highest levels of law enforcement. The Drug Enforcement Administration has been tracking Tyler's distribution network for months, Maya continued matter-of-factly. The Internal Revenue Service has launched investigations into tax evasion by multiple Westfield families. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit has been building cases against several school administrators. Brooke sank to the floor beside Jake, overwhelmed by the revelation that their seemingly perfect world was about to collapse around them. We didn't know, she whispered. We just thought we were part of the normal social structure here. We didn't realize. Maya's expression softened slightly as she looked at Brooke's genuine distress. That's part of the problem, isn't it? You were raised in this environment, taught that discrimination and corruption were normal because everyone around you participated in them. You never questioned whether your advantages came at other people's expense. She crouched down to Brooke's eye level, her voice taking on an almost gentle tone. I'm not interested in destroying everyone at Westfield, Brooke. Some of you are victims of this system as much as perpetrators. But the people at the top, the ones who created and maintained this corruption, they need to face consequences. Madison pushed away from the sink, her fear transforming into desperate anger. You sanctimonious little witch. You think you're some kind of hero, but you're just another outsider who couldn't handle not being the center of attention. This is about your ego, not justice. Maya stood and turned to face Madison with renewed intensity. You want to know what this is really about? It's about a foster kid named Maria Santos who attended Westfield 3 years ago. She was here on an academic scholarship, just like you assumed I was. She tried to report sexual harassment by members of the football team, but the administration buried her complaints because those boys came from influential families. The name hung in the air like an accusation, and Maya could see recognition dawn in Madison's eyes. Maria transferred schools mid-semester after her locker was repeatedly vandalized. Her scholarship application was mysteriously flagged for review, and she started receiving anonymous threats. But before she left, she reached out to my father's unit because she suspected that the harassment was connected to larger criminal activity. Maya's voice took on a harder edge as she continued Maria's story. She was right. The same football players who harassed her were part of Tyler's drug distribution network. The administrators who ignored her complaints were being paid to look the other way. The families who pressured her to leave were protecting their own criminal enterprises. Jake tried to interrupt, But Maya cut him off with a sharp gesture. Maria asked my father to send someone who could get justice for her and for all the other students who had been victimized by this system. Someone who could gather evidence that adults had missed and who could infiltrate the social networks that protected the corruption. The truth of Maya's mission at Westfield finally became clear to her audience. She wasn't just a new student who had been targeted for harassment. She was an undercover operative whose presence at the school was part of a larger investigation into systematic corruption and abuse. Madison's voice cracked as the full implications hit her. You've been planning this entire time. Everything that happened, all of it was manipulation to get us to expose ourselves. Maya shook her head. Slowly, no, Madison. I hoped that Westfield might actually be different, that I could complete my education here without needing to activate my contingency plans. You chose to target me because of my race and perceived economic status. You chose to escalate harassment into threats and violence. I just responded to the choices you made. She gestured toward Jake, who was still bleeding from his encounter with her defensive capabilities. I could have ended this confrontation in the first week if I had wanted to. I have skills that would let me neutralize all of you without breaking a sweat. But I hoped that documentation and the threat of exposure might be enough to change behavior without destroying lives. Brooke looked up with tears streaming down her face. What happens now? What happens to our families, our futures? Maya's expression remained impassive as she considered the question. That depends entirely on what choices you make from this moment forward. The evidence I've gathered is already in the hands of federal investigators. Some prosecutions are inevitable, especially for the adults who created and maintained this system. She paused, letting the weight of consequence settle before offering a path forward. But cooperation can make a significant difference in how severely individuals are charged and sentenced. Students who provide testimony about the criminal activities they witnessed, who help investigators understand how the corruption operated. They might find that prosecutors are willing to consider reduced charges or alternative sentencing. Madison seized on this possibility with desperate hope. What kind of cooperation? What would we need to do? Maya's smile returned, but now it carried a different quality, the satisfaction of someone who had achieved her primary objectives. Full disclosure about everything you know. Financial records, communication logs, witness testimony about criminal activities you've observed or participated in. Complete cooperation with federal investigators and a commitment to changing the culture that enabled this corruption. Jake struggled to speak through his swollen face. And if we refuse? If we try to fight this? Maya's response was delivered with calm certainty. Then you face the full weight of federal prosecution without any consideration for cooperation. Money laundering, drug distribution, tax evasion, civil rights violations, the charges will be severe, and the sentences will reflect the systematic nature of the criminal enterprise. She began gathering her belongings, preparing to leave the bathroom that had served as the stage for this dramatic confrontation. You have 24 hours to decide how you want to proceed. After that, federal agents will be arriving at Westfield to begin making arrests and executing search warrants. Madison's voice rose in panic. Wait, you can't just leave us like this. We need time to think, to talk to our families, to understand our options. Maya paused at the bathroom door, looking back at the 3 students who had entered this space as predators but were leaving as prey. 24 hours is more consideration than you showed Maria, Santos, or any of the other students you've victimized over the years. Use the time wisely. She opened the door to find Tyler Stevens still standing guard in the hallway, his confident expression faltering as he took in the scene behind her. Jake was battered and bloody, Madison and Brooke were crying, and Maya looked completely unruffled, despite having been outnumbered 4-1. Your turn, Tyler, Maya said conversationally as she walked past him. The bathroom's available if you want to have a private conversation with your friends. about federal drug charges and money laundering. Investigations. Tyler's face went pale as the implications of Maya's words penetrated his consciousness. He had been expecting to hear that the scholarship girl had been properly intimidated and put in her place. Instead, he was facing the collapse of everything he had built his identity around. Maya walked down the hallway with measured steps, aware that every student she passed was watching her with new interest and speculation. Word of the bathroom confrontation would spread through Westfield's social network within hours, but the true scope of what had transpired would remain hidden until federal agents arrived to begin their arrests. As she descended the stairs toward the main floor, Maya allowed herself a moment of satisfaction at having completed the first phase of her mission successfully. The evidence was documented, the criminals were identified, and justice was finally coming for the students and families who had used their privilege to escape consequences for their actions. But she also felt a profound sadness for the community that had chosen corruption over integrity, for the students who had been raised to believe that discrimination and abuse were acceptable as long as they were practiced by the right people against the right targets. Westfield could have been a place of genuine education and growth, but instead it had become a breeding ground for the next generation of white-collar criminals and corrupt officials. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from her federal contact, confirming that arrest warrants had been finalized and that tactical teams would be in position by morning. The investigation that had begun with Maria Santos's cry for justice was about to reach its conclusion, and the students who had thought themselves untouchable were about to learn that no one was above the law. As she pushed through the main doors of Westfield High, Maya looked back at the imposing brick building that had housed so much hidden corruption and systematic abuse. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning that would transform the school and the community around it, forcing them to confront the ugly reality behind their facade of suburban respectability. But today, Maya Johnson had done what she came to do. She had gathered the evidence, documented the crimes, and given the perpetrators a chance to choose cooperation over confrontation. What happened next would depend on the choices they made in the next 24 hours, but Maya was confident that justice would finally be served for Maria Santos and all the other students who had been victimized by Westfield's culture of corruption and abuse. The sun was setting as Maya walked toward her modest apartment, her backpack heavy with the evidence that would transform an entire community. Behind her, Westfield High stood in the gathering darkness, its windows reflecting the dying light, like the eyes of a predator that had finally been cornered by its intended prey. Tomorrow would bring federal agents, arrest warrants, and the beginning of a legal process that would hold accountable those who had used their privilege to escape justice for too long. But tonight, Maya Johnson could rest knowing that she had honored her father's training, completed her mission successfully, and proven that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks like they don't belong there. The federal agents arrived at Westfield High at precisely 7:30 in the morning, their black SUVs forming a coordinated perimeter around the school's main entrance as students began arriving for what they assumed would be another ordinary Tuesday. Maya watched from across the street as Agent Sarah Chun, her primary federal contact, stepped out of the lead vehicle wearing a crisp navy suit and an expression of professional determination. The sight of federal law enforcement on campus sent shockwaves through the student body, their conversations shifting from weekend gossip to frantic speculation about what could have brought the FBI to their pristine suburban school. Maya observed the chaos with the detached satisfaction of someone who had orchestrated every detail of this moment through months of careful planning and evidence gathering. Madison Parker's BMW pulled into the student parking lot, just as Agent Chun was conferring with Principal Anderson near the main entrance. Maya could see Madison's face go ashen through the windshield as she recognized the unmistakable signs of a federal investigation in progress. For several minutes, Madison sat frozen in her car, apparently unable to process that her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her. Tyler Stevens arrived moments later in his lifted truck, the vehicle's aggressive stance and custom modification suddenly seeming juvenile rather than intimidating against the backdrop of federal authority. He parked haphazardly and stumbled toward the building, his usual confident swagger replaced by the uncertain gait of someone whose reality had been fundamentally altered overnight. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chun indicating that the first wave of arrests would begin within the hour. She had spent the previous evening finalizing her testimony and organizing the evidence that would support prosecution of the most serious offenders. The scope of corruption at Westfield had exceeded even federal expectations, with tentacles reaching into multiple criminal enterprises throughout the region. The first arrest came during second period, when Coach Martinez was escorted from the gymnasium in handcuffs while his physical education classes watched in stunned silence. The charges against him included distribution of controlled substances, corruption of minors, and conspiracy to commit fraud. His steroid distribution network had been operating for over 5 years, with profits laundered through the athletic department's equipment purchasing accounts. Principal Anderson followed an hour later, his arrest occurring in full view of the administrative staff who had enabled his schemes for the better part of a decade. The evidence against him included falsified transcripts, fraudulent scholarship applications, and systematic grade manipulation that had allowed academically unqualified students to gain admission to prestigious universities in exchange for substantial payments to offshore accounts. Maya attended her morning classes with surreal normalcy, taking notes on calculus derivatives while federal agents methodically dismantled the criminal network that had controlled Westfield for years. Her classmates cast nervous glances in her direction, beginning to suspect that her presence at the school was somehow connected to the dramatic events unfolding around them. The realization that Maya Johnson was not who she appeared to be spread through Westfield's social network with viral intensity. Students who had dismissed her as an insignificant scholarship case began reassessing every interaction they had witnessed, recognizing the signs of systematic intelligence gathering that they had been too arrogant to notice in real time. Emma Chun found Maya during lunch period, her expression mixing admiration with bewilderment as she sat across from her lab partner at their usual table. "You're not really 17, are you?" she asked quietly, studying Maya's face for signs of the deception that had fooled everyone for months. Maya smiled with genuine warmth, the first truly relaxed expression Emma had seen from her since her arrival at Westfield. "I'm 17, but I've had experiences that most adults never face, and training that prepared me for situations like this one." She gestured toward the chaos visible through the cafeteria windows, where federal agents continued loading evidence boxes into their vehicles while shell-shocked students tried to process the destruction of everything they had believed about their school and community. "My father always taught me that privilege without accountability becomes corruption, and that corruption spreads like cancer until someone has the courage to cut it out," Maya continued. "Westfield needed surgery, and sometimes surgery is painful, even when it's necessary." Emma nodded thoughtfully, processing the implications of Maya's mission and its successful completion. "What happens to students like Madison and Tyler? The ones who were part of the system, but maybe didn't understand how deep it went?" Maya's expression grew more serious as she considered the question. "That depends on the choices they make in the next few hours. Federal prosecutors are willing to consider cooperation agreements for students who provide complete and truthful testimony about the criminal activities they witnessed or participated in." The afternoon brought a dramatic escalation as Tyler Stevens was arrested during his study hall period. The charges against him including distribution of controlled substances, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. His drug distribution network had been sophisticated enough to operate across multiple schools in the district, with profits channeled through his father's construction company to avoid detection. Maya watched through the classroom window as Tyler was led away in handcuffs, his usual arrogance replaced by the vacant expression of someone whose entire identity had been stripped away in a matter of hours. Several of his teammates were arrested simultaneously, their football careers ending in handcuffs and federal charges rather than college scholarships and professional dreams. The final confrontation came during the last period of the day, when Madison Parker was called to the principal's office over the intercom. Maya could see her former tormentor's hands shaking as she gathered her belongings, her perfect composure finally cracking under the weight of impending consequences. Madison's arrest was the most dramatic of the day, occurring in the main hallway as students were changing classes. The charges against her included civil rights violations, conspiracy to commit fraud, and accessory to drug distribution. Her family's car dealership had been serving as a money laundering operation for multiple criminal enterprises, with Madison serving as a courier for illegal proceeds, disguised as legitimate business transactions. As federal agents escorted Madison toward the exit, she caught sight of Maya standing near her locker with several other students. Their eyes met across the crowded hallway, and Maya could see the mixture of hatred and grudging respect in Madison's expression as she finally understood the true scope of her opponent's capabilities. "This isn't over," Madison called out, her voice carrying across the hallway with desperate defiance. "My family has resources you can't imagine. We'll fight these charges and we'll win." Maya's response was delivered with calm certainty that carried to every student within earshot. "Your family's resources are frozen pending investigation into money laundering and tax evasion. Your legal team is under investigation for conspiracy to obstruct justice. And your testimony is the only thing that might reduce your sentence from decades to years." The harsh reality of Madison's situation settled over the hallway like a funeral shroud as students realized that their former queen was facing federal prison time rather than college applications and sorority parties. The social hierarchy that had defined Westfield High for generations had collapsed in a single day, replaced by the cold equality of federal justice. Agent Chun approached Maya as the school day ended, her professional demeanor softening slightly, as she addressed the teenager who had made this investigation possible. "Exceptional work, Maya. The evidence you gathered will support prosecutions that could have taken us years to develop through traditional methods." Maya accepted the praise with the quiet dignity of someone who had completed a difficult mission successfully. "What happens to the school now? To the students who weren't part of the criminal network?" Agent Chun's expression grew more optimistic as she considered the question. "Westfield will undergo federal oversight for the next several years, with new administration and teaching staff who are committed to educational excellence rather than financial corruption. The students who remain will have the opportunity to rebuild the school's culture based on merit and integrity rather than family connections and criminal proceeds." The federal investigation ultimately resulted in 47 arrests spanning 3 counties, with criminal enterprises worth over $50 million dismantled through Maya's intelligence gathering. The prosecutions that followed would transform the entire region's approach to public education and community oversight, establishing precedents for federal intervention in systematically corrupt institutions. Maya's testimony before federal grand juries was considered instrumental in securing convictions against the most serious offenders, including Principal Anderson, who received a 15-year sentence for his role in the conspiracy. Coach Martinez received 12 years for drug distribution and corruption of minors, while Tyler Stevens was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison despite his cooperation with prosecutors. Madison Parker's fate became the most closely watched aspect of the case, her family's fall from prominence serving as a cautionary tale about the consequences of using privilege to escape accountability. Her cooperation with federal investigators ultimately reduced her sentence to 5 years, but Her family's car dealership was seized as proceeds of criminal activity, and her college prospects were permanently destroyed. The transformation of Westfield High School became a model for educational reform throughout the state, with federal oversight ensuring that admission and advancement were based solely on academic merit, rather than family connections or financial contributions. New policies prohibited the kind of systematic discrimination that had targeted students like Maria Santos, while enhanced security measures prevented the drug distribution networks that had operated with impunity for years. Maya completed her senior year at Westfield under her true identity, her cover no longer necessary now that the criminal network had been dismantled. She found herself genuinely popular among students who appreciated her role in exposing the corruption that had limited their own opportunities for advancement. Her academic performance, no longer constrained by the need to maintain a low profile, established new records for achievement that reflected her true capabilities rather than her carefully constructed facade. College recruiters competed for her attention, impressed by both her academic credentials and her unique experience in federal law enforcement operations. The graduation ceremony that spring carried special significance for Maya and the other students who had survived Westfield's transformation from criminal enterprise to legitimate educational institution. Her father, Sergeant Major Johnson, attended in full dress uniform, his pride in his daughter's accomplishments evident to everyone in attendance. Maria Santos also attended the graduation ceremony, having transferred back to Westfield for her final semester after the federal investigation validated her original complaints about systematic harassment and discrimination. Her presence served as a reminder of the human cost of corruption and the importance of ensuring that justice reaches those who use privilege to escape accountability. Maya's valedictorian speech focused on the themes of integrity, accountability, and the responsibility that comes with privilege, her words carrying special weight given her role in exposing the corruption that had previously defined the school's culture. She spoke about the importance of using advantages to lift others up rather than keeping them down, and about the courage required to challenge systems of oppression, even when doing so carries personal risk. The standing ovation that followed her speech came not just from proud parents and faculty members, but from students who understood that Maya had given them the opportunity to rebuild their school's reputation, based on genuine achievement rather than criminal proceeds. Her mission at Westfield had succeeded beyond even federal expectations, transforming not just individual lives, but an entire community's approach to education and accountability. As Maya accepted her diploma and prepared for college at a prestigious university where she would study criminal justice and cybersecurity, she reflected on the lessons learned during her time at Westfield High School. The experience had taught her that corruption thrives in environments where good people remain silent, and that sometimes the most effective response to systematic injustice is patient intelligence gathering followed by decisive action. Her father's training had prepared her for the tactical aspects of her mission, but the emotional resilience required to endure months of harassment while building a federal case had come from her own inner strength and commitment to justice. The success at Westfield would serve as a foundation for future operations, as federal agencies recognized the unique value of operatives who could blend into teenage social environments while gathering evidence against sophisticated criminal networks. The final chapter of Maya's story at Westfield came 6 months after graduation, when she received a letter from the Department of Justice offering her a position as a consultant for future investigations involving educational institutions and juvenile criminal enterprises. Her success in exposing the corruption at Westfield had established her as a specialist in operations that required both technical expertise and social intelligence. Maya accepted the position with the understanding that her work would continue to focus on protecting vulnerable students from the kind of systematic abuse that had driven Maria Santos from her education and threatened to do the same to countless others. The mission that had begun as a favor to a victimized foster child had evolved into a career dedicated to ensuring that privilege never again served as a shield for those who would exploit and harm the defenseless. As she prepared to begin her college career, Maya looked back on her time at Westfield High School with satisfaction at having completed her mission successfully and gratitude for the opportunity to serve justice in a meaningful way. The quiet scholarship student who had endured weeks of racist harassment had revealed herself to be one of the most effective undercover operatives in federal service, and her success had opened doors to future opportunities that would allow her to continue fighting for those who could not fight for themselves. The legacy of her time at Westfield would live on in the reformed institution that emerged from the ashes of systematic corruption, in the students who learned that integrity matters more than family connections, and in the federal policies that now protected other schools from the kind of criminal infiltration that had once made education secondary to profit and prejudice. Maya Johnson had entered Westfield High School as an apparent victim, but she left as a proven agent of justice whose courage and capability had transformed an entire community. Her story would inspire future operations and serve as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is indeed the one who looks like they don't belong there. 2 years after the federal investigation that transformed Westfield High School, Maya Johnson stood in the lecture hall of Georgetown University, delivering a presentation to a room full of criminal justice students about the intersection of technology and undercover operations. Her audience listened with rapt attention as she detailed the methodology behind one of the most successful educational corruption cases in federal history, though she was careful to protect certain operational details that remained classified. The young woman who had once endured racist harassment while posing as a vulnerable scholarship student now commanded respect as one of the youngest consultants ever employed by the Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section. Her expertise in digital forensics and undercover operations had made her invaluable in investigations spanning from corporate fraud to human trafficking networks. The key to successful long-term undercover work, Maya explained to her audience, is understanding that your cover identity must be bulletproof, not just on paper, but in every aspect of your behavior and psychological presentation. The subjects of investigation are often highly intelligent individuals who have survived by reading people accurately, so any inconsistency in your persona can be fatal to the operation. A student in the front row raised her hand. How do you handle the psychological stress of maintaining a false identity while enduring genuine harassment and discrimination? Doesn't that create trauma that could compromise your effectiveness? Maya paused thoughtfully before answering, appreciating the sophistication of the question. It absolutely creates psychological pressure that has to be managed carefully. The key is remembering that the harassment you're enduring serves a larger purpose, that documenting those crimes provides justice not just for you, but for future victims who might face the same treatment. She clicked to the next slide in her presentation, which showed statistics about the decline in discriminatory incidents at schools that had undergone federal oversight following corruption investigations. The students who targeted me at Westfield weren't just bullies acting out of personal malice. They were enforcers of a systematic culture of discrimination that had been institutionalized for decades. By enduring their harassment and documenting it properly, we were able to dismantle not just their individual criminal activities, but the entire social structure that enabled them. After her lecture, Maya walked across Georgetown's campus toward her dormitory, reflecting on how different her college experience was from what she had initially imagined. Instead of the typical undergraduate concerns about parties and dating, she found herself balancing advanced coursework with ongoing federal investigations that required her expertise in digital surveillance and social infiltration. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Chen, who had become both a professional mentor and something approaching a friend over the past 2 years. The message was brief but intriguing. New case requires your specific skill set. High school environment, Suspected trafficking network. Interested? Maya stopped walking and leaned against a campus bench to compose her response. Each new assignment brought the satisfaction of meaningful work, but also the emotional cost of assuming false identities and enduring whatever treatment her cover required. The success at Westfield had opened doors to increasingly complex and dangerous operations, with targets who were more sophisticated and potentially more violent than teenage bullies. Details? She texted back, already knowing that she would accept regardless of the specifics. The work was too important and her skills too rare for her to prioritize personal comfort over the opportunity to protect vulnerable victims. Agent Chun's response came within minutes, outlining a case that involved a network of private schools being used to traffic international students whose immigration status made them vulnerable to exploitation. The operation required someone who could pose as a foreign exchange student while building digital profiles of the criminal network and gathering evidence for prosecution. Maya accepted the assignment with the same calm professionalism that had characterized her work since Westfield, but she also felt a familiar tightness in her chest as she prepared to once again submerge her true identity beneath whatever persona the mission required. The psychological cost of undercover work was cumulative, each assignment adding layers of emotional complexity that she would need to process and integrate carefully to maintain her mental health. That evening, Maya called her father from her dorm room, their weekly conversation serving as an anchor to her authentic identity amidst the constant role-playing that defined her professional life. Sergeant Major Johnson had retired from active duty the previous year, but remained involved in training programs for military intelligence operatives, his expertise in psychological operations making him valuable to the next generation of covert specialists. "How are you holding up, kiddo?" her father asked, his voice carrying the warmth and concern that had sustained Maya through the most difficult moments of her unconventional career. "I'm good, Dad. Georgetown is challenging academically, but the coursework feels almost easy compared to maintaining cover identities under hostile surveillance. Professor Martinez thinks I should consider graduate school in criminal psychology after I finish my undergraduate degree." Her father chuckled, the sound bringing back memories of their conversations during Maya's childhood, moves from base to base. "Your mother always said you had a gift for understanding what made people tick. I just never imagined you'd be using those skills to take down criminal networks before you were old enough to drink legally." Maya smiled at the reference to her age, which remained a source of amazement to her federal colleagues, who sometimes forgot they were working with someone who hadn't yet reached her 20th birthday. Agent Chun has another assignment for ME, International Trafficking Network, using private schools as cover for exploitation operations. The line went quiet for a moment as her father processed the implications of her next mission. "Maya, I need you to promise me something. This work you're doing, it's important and you're exceptionally good at it, but don't let it consume who you are underneath all those cover identities. Make sure you're taking care of Maya Johnson, not just the operative she pretends to be." His concern was well-founded, as Maya had noticed herself becoming more emotionally detached in personal relationships, a side effect of spending so much time monitoring her own behavior for authenticity while presenting false personas to subjects of investigation. The skills that made her excellent at undercover work also created barriers to genuine intimacy and trust in her personal life. "I promise, Dad, I'm seeing the university counselor regularly, and Agent Chun makes sure I have adequate recovery time between assignments. The department takes the psychological welfare of undercover operatives seriously, especially ones as young as me." After ending the call, Maya sat at her desk and reviewed the preliminary briefing materials for her next assignment. The trafficking network operated across 5 states, using prestigious private schools to recruit international students whose immigration status made them vulnerable to exploitation. The victims were promised educational opportunities, but instead found themselves trapped in situations ranging from forced labor to sexual exploitation. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering, with estimated annual profits exceeding $20 million and victim counts in the hundreds. Previous attempts to investigate the network had failed because adult federal agents couldn't convincingly pose as teenage students, while legitimate high school students lacked the technical skills and psychological training necessary for complex undercover operations. Maya's unique combination of youthful appearance, advanced technical capabilities, and proven experience in educational environments made her the ideal candidate for infiltrating the network and gathering evidence for prosecution. The mission would require her to pose as a wealthy international student seeking admission to an elite boarding school, a cover identity that would allow her to observe the recruitment and exploitation processes firsthand. The emotional weight of knowing that real victims were suffering while she prepared for her mission added urgency to Maya's planning process. Each day that passed before she could begin gathering evidence represented continued exploitation of vulnerable students who had trusted adults to protect their educational dreams rather than prey upon their desperation. Maya spent the following week in intensive preparation sessions with federal trainers who specialized in international trafficking investigations. She learned about the psychological profiles of trafficking victims, the financial structures that supported exploitation networks, and the cultural dynamics that made certain populations particularly vulnerable to recruitment by criminal organizations. The technical aspects of her preparation were equally intensive, as Maya worked with cybersecurity specialists to develop digital tools that would allow her to penetrate the network's encrypted communications while maintaining her cover identity. The criminals they were targeting had sophisticated operational security measures that required equally sophisticated countermeasures to overcome. On the evening before her deployment, Maya stood in her dorm room packing the belongings that would support her new cover identity as Anastasia Petrov, the daughter of Russian oligarchs seeking an American education for their academically gifted child. The persona required her to adopt an entirely different personality profile, complete with cultural mannerisms and linguistic patterns that would withstand scrutiny from criminals who specialized in exploiting international students. As she folded designer clothes that were part of her cover wardrobe into expensive luggage, Maya reflected on the strange trajectory her life had taken since that first day at Westfield High School. What had begun as a mission to seek justice for a single victimized student had evolved into a career dedicated to protecting the most vulnerable members of society from systematic exploitation. The work was dangerous and emotionally demanding, requiring her to witness suffering that she couldn't immediately alleviate, while building cases that would ultimately provide justice for victims and prevent future exploitation. But Maya found deep satisfaction in knowing that her unique abilities were being used to fight against systems of oppression that thrived in shadows and silence. Her phone buzzed with a final message from Agent Chun, confirming transportation arrangements and providing emergency contact protocols for the upcoming mission. Maya responded with professional acknowledgement, while privately steeling herself for another immersion into the kind of environment where human dignity was treated as a commodity to be bought and sold. The young woman who had once endured harassment from privileged teenagers was about to confront criminals whose exploitation of vulnerable victims made Madison Parker's discrimination seem almost quaint by comparison. But Maya Johnson had proven at Westfield that she possessed both the technical skills and psychological resilience necessary to bring justice to those who believed themselves untouchable. As she prepared for sleep on her final night as a Georgetown University student for the foreseeable future, Maya thought about Maria Santos and the other victims whose suffering had motivated her to accept the risks and sacrifices that came with undercover work. Tomorrow she would once again disappear beneath a carefully constructed false identity, But her true purpose would remain constant, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves and ensuring that predators faced consequences for their crimes. The mission ahead would test her abilities in new ways, but Maya felt confident that the lessons learned at Westfield High School had prepared her for whatever challenges awaited. She had proven that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room really was the one who looked like they didn't belong there, and she was ready to prove it again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.